To support this channel and continuing to provide quality and accessible music education programming, please consider donating to the links in the description or in the pinned comment. Thank you.
We all have.
It starts in the basement of the voice and kind of remains there.
I was listening to this and I'm thinking, wow, this is extremely low. Most people would not sing this low, especially singers, women in particular.
Vesta Williams' rendition of We All Have a Star presents an interesting case study of range, tessitura, voice type, and even how gender can influence the quality of a sound. In singing, the vocal range represents a piece's highest to lowest note. The range for We All Have a Star is low E flat to D flat. Tessitura represents the range inside of the overall vocal range where most of the singing is done. For this piece, the majority of the singing is done between low A flat and C. Vesta's overall vocal range spans baritone low A to soprano high B flat. Her tessitura, or where the majority of her songs sit, are low G to high E. So looking at Vesta's tessitura in comparison to that of We All Have a Star, you can see that the piece sits pretty low in her range. But what does singing too low sound like?
So what is an audible sign that a song or someone is singing too low for where their voice wants to be?
I would have to say breathiness. The breathiness is a telltale sign. And also sort of this, anytime that I've heard someone singing too low, what happens is the sound starts to go back. And it creates, in certain voices, it can create this frog-like hollowness.
We all have.
That sort of back tone, like when she first starts out, we all have.
We all have.
That initial low F starts from such a raspy place, and the sound has this rattle to it that you don't really understand what the actual word does she's singing we, but by the time she gets to have, which is a much more comfortable position for her, the actual beauty of her tone is allowed to have more freedom.
We all have.
Then when she transitions from it shows who we are.
It shows who we are.
That it's the C to the B flat down to the A. Between the C and the A flat, you can hear the mechanism shift, and once again it goes back into that breathy place.
We are.
Instead of I definitely feel that was a stylistic choice. Having breathiness of quality is not always a sign of bad technique or under singing. Sometimes it can be very deliberate and very effective.
As a singer or musician, there is an awareness of how certain notes will sound in a particular voice when sung in a certain way to communicate a feeling. That's why songs are sometimes placed in keys that are too high or too low.
It shows who.
Whether this is a stylistic approach, we can acknowledge that this song is likely too low for her because the voice continues to run out of steam in the middle and at the end freezes.
A lot of people talk about how difficult it is to sustain singing high, but I've also heard many say that it's also difficult to sustain low singing.
When you're singing really low or you're singing really high, it's really hard to kind of focus the sound.
The lower pitches, the vocal folds are a little fatter and they move slower. It takes more air. As you are singing, if the low note is at the end of a phrase, it takes more air to keep it vibrating. It takes more air. As the higher pitches are, they can sing themselves. You can stay on a high note forever.
For example, the Karen Clark, to me, very close vowel, and she holds it for 75 years. But if she was to hold that octave up, that's hard to sustain and keep that while having, because you have with a higher pitch, it has to be an open sound. Or you close the voice. That's not good on any extreme pitch.
We all have.
Especially if you're staying on that low pitch, how much air to use. You might have to take a breath in there or something so that you can sustain, because it's requiring more air. The vocal folds, maybe a better way, the vocal folds are not as taut on the bottom. They're looser on the bottom than they are at the top. So by the time they get to the bottom,
We are one good night.
the vocal cords are open, all of the air is gone.
Okay, so I think what's interesting is a phrase that I also want to pay attention to is what our lives can mean.
We are what our lives can mean.
I don't know what is different about it, but that ends on A flat as well, but everything was even. And I wonder, is there anything she did differently? Because everything else, again, afterwards is just air.
Yes. So what she did there, she stayed in the initial position. So when she did the it shows who we are, that breathy position stayed all the way through to what, and then after she sang what, there was an immediate change on the exact same pitch on the next word, and that is some very swift vocal changes. That's actually very difficult, but she did do a small reset when she took that breath.
So I think what's interesting is that it starts out on F, and when you think about music, you know, it has to go somewhere. And so she starts slow, so she's probably either going to have to go lower or higher. And the way this song is arranged, she's going to go lower.
Moving on, we go to the measure 10, where Mother's singing an E flat.
One good night on high.
That's now holding that pitch for that long for a half note, that would become just a little bit more difficult.
The sky, a star.
In a woman's voice, how low are like those Fs, E's, and E flats and D's for you all to sing and to like stay on those pitches?
Very low. And if you notice, watch how she's eating the microphone when she gets to that low E flat. One good night, good night. She's eating that mic.
On high.
One eye. You hear it from me. That's low. And I'm a soprano. I don't believe Vesta was a soprano. I think she was a mezzo.
She's on the heavier side of a mezzo soprano. So a mezzo soprano is a soprano. She is a kind of soprano. Her voice just sits more in the middle. It doesn't mean she doesn't have the top, but it also does not automatically mean that she is a natural contralto, and can like live in the low tones almost at an inexhaustible rate.
What our lives can mean.
Thinking, wow, this is extremely low. Most people would not sing this low, especially singers, with women in particular, because this is incredibly low. I mean, the original recording of this is in this exact key.
The original recording is also by a man.
We all have a star.
Looking at the range of the entire human voice from the lowest bass to the highest soprano, there is a range of notes that we all share. But because they are the same notes does not mean that they will have the same quality of sound.
With starting out in this basement area, we all have like those notes.
We all have.
Those are also in the lower middle for most tenors.
We all have a star.
So between what she's doing and what a tenor is doing, there really is not much of a difference in terms of the placement.
Shining clear and
For the breathy quality would have served her more, which in a tenor voice, typically if he were to sing breathy in that area, it would not be received in the same way. It would be received typically as some maybe a vocal defect or something like that.
They sing the same notes. Why did that sound like that? And why did he sound how she sounded?
Well, the simple reason is, one, in the biological body of a soprano or a mezzo, this sits very low. So it's gonna sound a little bit more. Hold on, let me find these words. Let me find the words. Let me go back to on high.
one good night on high.
So that E flat in the male voice, you realize that the vibrato and the sound is more focused.
On high.
He can hold that forever. Now in Vesta's, it's more open
On high.
because it's lower. It's in a lower extremity of her voice.
There are no hard and fast rules about, where a particular voice type is supposed to sit all the time. But what I will say is that, you're singing the same pitches, but there is a very small, minute difference in the musculature. A lot of tenors and a lot of altos, they share an octave off all the time, often. But, a high C for a tenor in an operatic context, or even in a gospel context, like Rance Allen, for example. High Cs for tenors, like bringing the chest up. That C there is nothing for a mezzo or a soprano to sing. Same exact pitch, but the difference in the voice type creates the difference in the musculature, which then creates the difference in how it is approached.
I'm trying to even think if I was to sing technically like a high, this E, this E in chest, E. If I try to sing that an octave lower, like the same onset, E. I think it's way too far out of the range. And trying to sing it in chest it's not in my range.
Okay.
I mean, some people
you have the note, but it's not like
it's not the same. It won't be the same.
That makes a lot of sense because it's just like when you just tried that that with that onset, it sounded pretty similar to how she actually started.
We all have.
Yeah, because it's just like,
You know, one thing my first voice teacher always told me was that, you know, you have a wide variety of notes in your range, but where your voice lives is what makes all the difference. So you can have low Gs, you can have high Bs, B flat, Cs, whatever, but it does not mean that that's where your voice wants to stay all the time. And that's where Tessitura comes in the conversation. And all those things are really important to consider when you're writing music for certain voice types. And so if you're going to sing something that was written for a different voice type, you're going to have to do a lot of renegotiating.
It shows who we are.
what we heard, and we all have a star, it sounded amazing, but that was work still, just on the other end of the voice.
Yes, it was work. It was work to stay down there and to communicate effectively, which is why in We All Have a Star, as soon as she ends her last lowest phrase in that part of the clip before she goes on to So Strong, Much More Than You and I.
A star so strong.
The emotions of the song, they expand, not just by the text, but by the way the actual music is written. And then she also is a bit more vocally free.
I'm interested to see what he would sound like if he attempted to do the D flats and the embellishment that Vesta did.
A star so strong, much more than you and I. More than you and
It'll be a completely different sound. And the accessibility, even the way he sang it. If we were to be able to watch him perform this tune and see how his body is physically, it'll be completely different.
What we are hearing is a combination of range, tessitura, voice type, and biological limitations that all come into play in this piece of music. Vesta chooses to add her embellishments in the piece in the middle and upper middle parts of her voice because that is where her voice is most comfortable, and that is also where her personal music is centered.
If you think about the ending of the song, was where she goes, you more than you and I. So she's on B, C, D flat, B, C, D flat, B, C, D flat. And if you think about any of her other songs, like Congratulations, C or D flat.
Mm-hmm.
So she, at any of her music, she wants to find her way to that area.
Yep.
In her own music, she also has the same low notes for We All Have a Star written in them, but the quality of sound is completely different.
In this one, she visited the low tones. She didn't stay in that realm. It was sort of a touch and go situation. And that lets me know that the crux or the meat of her voice is not in the basement.
One of my favorite mezzos, Carolyn Sabron, she said, a lot of people like to focus on the note. So whether that's the very high note or the very low note. And she said, but it's actually the notes that come before it that are most important, and the notes that come after.
Amen.
You must have a semblance of the pitch in the pitch before it. This is something that I was always taught by my teachers. And what I noticed that Vesta does here that's really beautiful, before she goes down to that low pitch, it's the pitch right before it. She gives so much energy and meat to it and uses it as a jumping off point before it's a that was so beautifully placed, very clear, and it allowed her to reach the lowest note and be heard on that microphone without the breathiness that we heard in "We All Have a Star."
She has a beautifully low extension, so she's able to go, and just be hanging out. But also because she didn't stay there.
It speaks to like she has the notes, like she can sing them, but she can't live on them, like we heard with "We All Have a Star."
Exactly. That her voice, her instrument. That's not Vesta Williams.
We all have a star.
Living down there is a whole different ball game. But she was vacationing for a very long time in that lower range. But she just, a quick little day trip. And that's okay. And also, just like anything, just because a piano has 88 keys doesn't mean you need to play all 88. Just because you have the accessibility doesn't mean it's needed all the time. And I think that separates a musician from a singer, I think.
From a singer's point of view, what does it feel like when you are singing too low for your voice?
It's immediate discomfort, but it's also the same sensation that I've gotten when singing too high. It's the same sensation for me, at least, on both ends of the spectrum. And I will say that singing low, I'm glad you asked me that question because I am a male soprano. So I started out training in the tenor octave for a number of years before eventually I realized that it was actually very vocally uncomfortable. And, I had a naturally high placement. I didn't really experience a voice break throughout my childhood. So, I had access to the higher octaves and I could sing up there comfortably. So when I decided to make the switch, what happened was things that I used to think were so high became part of my middle voice. And that changes the psychology of how I approached the actual art of singing.
One good night on high, you see.
When you're singing into one end of the spectrum, you can feel a general lack of support. And even if you sing it well and people like it, if it's causing you discomfort, you should stop. Because the only person who's in charge of these two little things in here is you. It's not anyone else. And I think singing too low can be detrimental, but it doesn't get talked about as much. Whereas singing too high, the conversation about vocal damage is almost always about people singing too high.